Hi, everybody. This is Patty Toledo. We are starting one more podcast with Creative Raids. And today we have full team. We have Sophia Drake and Charly Harbord with us. This is the golden team. Like these are the girls that are going to take the industry one podcast at a time. But because you guys didn't have the chance to talk to Charlie, to listen to Charlie last week, so Charlie, please introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay, so hi, I'm Charly Harbord. I'm the Director of Partnerships for Global Game Jam. I have over 20 years experience working in game industry, starting out as a localizer in China, which was a wild time, doing English to Chinese, Chinese to English translations. I've continued to do that a little bit on the side, but I then went to do a PhD in games and arts, working with women in games, doing all the academic stuff, and then found that industry was my absolute dream home and it was my calling. So this is why I'm here. Oh, but I also work as a
Nice.
creative consultant for a number of games that I'm not allowed to talk about because of NDAs, but they're real.
Plus that the Global Game Jam travel takes you everywhere in the world, so you can
Yeah,
see games from everywhere every time. But
exactly. And I wasn't here last week because I was in South Africa, cage diving with great white sharks. I love my job.
now we are truly international. Sophia in Japan, Charlie in Africa at the moment, and me in Dublin. Is like, yeah, I'm the boring one for the moment. This is
Oh
the
no,
boring location.
I'm in back home in Scotland for another couple of
Oh,
days.
you're
So
back.
I'm on terra firma right now.
Yay. And the good thing is we can establish here that putting you two girls together, we have a good 35-year experience working with indie developers. So I would say
Yeah.
we're you are quite qualified to talk about the topic of the day. Like it's covered. I it's not very often that I am in the room that I am the least qualified person of the room, so it's a good one. So today we're going to be talking about indie devs. And I wanted to start from very big because from the people that are watching this or listening, most of them I imagine that have been in the gaming industry or is in the gaming industry. But one thing I notice is that definitions sometimes get mixed and twisted in this industry. The way people see certain things mutate quite a lot. So I wanted to start from the very base and saying, how do you girls define indie developers? What are indie developers for you? What is an indie game?
That's a big question, and the definitions are almost built on shifting sand. I think you have people who say as long as you have no outside money or outside forces in the game development process, then it's an indie. So if you have a publisher who comes on after the development of your game and then funds you, some people would still say that that's an indie game, and I would. Other people would say, no, now you've sold out, you're not indie anymore. Some people define it as your main motivation is freedom and creativity, not finance, which is the dream, right? But how can you do anything without finance? And then to throw a wee cat among the pigeons, if it's a studio that has no outside funding involved, does that make Epic an indie studio?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please
it's
say.
it, it it's a tough one. I mean, there's like you say, there's a range of different ways to clarify what is an indie, and I think in many respects, all of the above are valid. I think it's in many respects it's easier to identify what's not indie than what is indie. Now, that's not to say that there is no indie identity. It's quite the opposite. It's just, you know, you can clearly identify who's not indie quite a lot of the time. But when you are indie, a lot of the time it comes down to, yeah, what's the DNA of the company? What's the heart? What's the soul of it? Now, obviously, you can have a company that was once indie that's been bought out potentially, and then you may see like these shifting sands fully. It may be that creatively there is still that indie DNA in it, but the studio is not really indie in and of itself anymore. You know, and then also you have those differing definitions, like you said, Charlie, to throw a spanner in the works, are epic indie. Well, then there's the other thing. We always use things like student developers. We use that term quite a lot. Well, technically, they would be indie as well. They would be an indie developer. And yet we seem to also have this classification that, okay, no, it's as though they're on the road to becoming an indie studio. So I suppose it's like anything in life. There is no binary. There is really no sort of tick box exercise in it, and it is this line. But I suppose, yeah, everything you said, Charlie, is, I would reiterate. I would say it comes into, what's in the DNA. I think it does have that small scale bootstrap nature at its heart. Indie development, the idea that they would have the whole team. I think in a lot of respects, and this is very nebulous, this is not like a true definition, but sometimes the image that comes to mind for a lot of people would be that everyone in the team is having a say in all of the elements. It's not this, oh, there's that department that does that, and there's that department that does that, and we join once a week for a meeting to bring it all together. There's the idea of, oh yeah, we're all sort of sitting in the same room, or maybe it's the same area, and if you want to know something, we just go and walk up to them, and we've got this interaction. And that's even when you're talking about a team. I mean, a lot of the time indie development is one person or three people, and they're either working all together in the same room, or they're working remote in the same Slack where they're all just talking to each other all day long. So there are definitely differing forms, and we see that play out both in the the area like itch or Steam, where it can be fairly easier to identify indie, and then we see that play all the way up to console, or the high-end PC market, where it can become a lot more trickier to define what is or isn't indie. But I think most of the time, yeah, you can identify when something's not indie. I think that's a very murky answer, but it's a murky question. I think that's the point.
Yeah, true. For me, I think there is a lot. I agree with everything you guys said, not dismissing any of it, but there is one part that always plays very strong in my heart when I see an indie developer, which is the freedom of creativity,
Yeah.
is having this yeah, and I think you both mentioned on this thing of being uh, indie at heart, that sometimes it's not necessarily that the company is indie, but they have this indie structure or this indie mindset, that they are still able to develop games with no strings attached, and they are like pushing boundaries in what are the creative outlets that they can use for their game, and don't it comes a lot with which publisher you are working with, or if you are self-publishing, because that comes to it is a murky question. I agree with you guys, is that not only is murky, is that there are so much that can be like, then what is an indie publisher? Like we can make it even more complicated on that sense, but for me it's a lot about creative freedom.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is, when you ask the question, what is an indie, whether it's us talking now, or whether it's in the mainstream press, or whether it's a talk at a conference, a lot of the conversation seems to focus on the areas where it's harder to define. It's very simple to define who is indie. Like we were saying before, there's a team, let's just make it up. There's a team of three people who are developing their second game for PC, and they're doing it all themselves, but they're hoping to find a publisher as well, and they're building off what they learned from their first game. Clearly indie. Now, they're not all indies, but they're clearly indie. And equally, you have, just pick a massive company, which, does blur those lines. But, you could take someone like, like Nintendo, clearly not indie. But most of these companies at one point in time, possibly, most of them would have been indie. And I think this is the point, is that there will, for a lot of companies, be a time where they're in the middle. They're transitioning from being indie studio to being a bigger studio. Some of them their transition will end at a place where their creativity and their DNA remains indie, but the studio alters slightly. Maybe for some, the studio doesn't actually alter that much, apart from the fact that it now has big financial backing. But ultimately, that will change things because now there's people to answer to. And for some, like, to call your example, Charlie, like Epic, they'll evolve to kind of becoming on the other side of the table in many respects, taking little bits as they go. So, and that's more focusing on the when is an indie studio not an indie studio anymore. But I think the thing to remember when talking about this topic is it can be quite easy to identify an indie studio. Sometimes I like to say, like, there's no need to overthink this. For example, I run the Big Indie Pitch for Pocket Gamer, and we just look at, now we're not saying that teams that don't fall into this aren't indie, but what we say, because we're focusing on these smaller growing studios, is less than 12, team of less than 12, not attached to a publisher yet, any platform's fine. Mix of creativities is fine. Obviously we're looking for a mix of identities and, styles and everything like that. But the point is, those people clearly, 99% of the time are indie. Now, we're not saying the rest aren't, but, you can clearly identify a group. And then there's the murky area.
I think there's also within that definition the sort of parameters of an indie studio. People tend to multitask, so a programmer might be helping with
Yeah.
audio. You do a much wider skill set. But part of that is the nature of an indie studio in that they are able to pivot much faster. They can make changes much faster. They can, if something's not working, they can change it. If someone wants to try out a new gear, it's a safer space to do that because there's not millions and millions of dollars involved in all of these decisions. So it's that sort of agility and that ability to pivot and multitasking, I think, also defines an indie studio in the core of how it's run as an indie studio, whether there's publishers or whatever else involved. And also that ownership of our property, whether that's within a 5-person team, a solo dev, everyone has ownership and everyone has hopefully equal input into that. And from the indie studios, I know that it's very much this sort of collaborative experience as opposed to a strict hierarchical structure. And I think that's part of the definition that isn't always considered. And maybe if there is a publisher or external funding involved, I don't necessarily think that negates it from being an indie studio if that's how they're running within that indie core.
Yeah.
That comes to my next answer. With the definition of indie that we play, or the many definitions, because I don't think there is a right answer or wrong answer in any way. In your opinion, how do you see the indie market at the moment for games, especially with all these merger and acquisitions and all these talks about investment? I think a lot of the conversation has been very much focused on the big players and how they are growing, but I think it's really important for us to see what is happening with the indies, what is happening with the small studios. Are and I will make the question even more complicated. Besides, what is the how do you see the market? Is there still a market for indie developers, or are they already building companies and doing things with the idea of acquisition, or with the idea of being part of something bigger than themselves? I'm not
I
making
think
your life easy today.
I think I think we're at the point with indie development in the market where we've kind of hit sort of what I call like the double-edged sword zone, which is like before it was difficult, before the liberalization of the market with self-publishing, it was insanely difficult for indie developers. Obviously, the liberalization of the market, the app stores, plus then the platforms opening up, with the rise of digital distribution, made the gold rush zone where you could literally go from, oh, I've got to get a job at a studio, to no way, I can just do this myself. And you don't have to be the one in a million. You can just be kind of anyone and just do this. And now we've grown to the part where everyone can do it. Well, they can. The market's so liberalized that so many people are doing it, which is awesome. But the double-edged sword part of it is there's so many people doing it. So it's now become very, very, very competitive to make your indie game work in the market. It's not really an issue, I feel, at this point of creativity. There's never been more creative ideas out there. It's fantastic from the point of view when I'm mentoring as part of Transfuser or other areas, or when I'm running the big indie pitch and seeing, thousands of pitches and decks through, there's never been more creativity. The problem, the double-edged part of the problem is not even getting it to market. It's fairly straightforward to publish your game once you know what you're doing, to self-publish. It's about finding the market. It's the discoverability that's become the problem. The mainstream media and press, as obviously, is going through challenges, and so understandably is doubling down on the big hitters to make sure that they're still competitive in their market. And a lot of this zone has moved into, your YouTube, your TikTok, your social media spheres, and your self-run video, bloggers. And that's where the problem comes, is about finding it, because these studios don't have a huge PR department. They don't have a massive marketing budget. So it's about, how do you find discoverability when the moment you release on Steam, you're one of thousands in that particular week that are releasing? So, it's never been a better time to be an indie from the point of view of, I want to do it myself. But I think we as an industry need to find ways to help discoverability so that great ideas don't get lost. And one of those ideas, and one of those areas where I do think it's working, is indie publishing. I think there is as someone who's worked for multiple publishers of indie games that focus on indie publishing, I think there is a strong market here for finding great new talent that honestly are games that would be hugely successful, both in the mainstream media and in the market, but run the risk of being lost in the mix. And I think partnering with those to help them. I think there's also a role for PR departments there as well. So I think this is one of the big challenges for indie developers right now, is being discovered, whether that be to get your game to market, or actually the other thing that just came to mind, which is actually equally, if not maybe more important, is funding as well. Like discoverability to get that backing to maybe get this idea across the line.
Charlie, before you go, I just wanted to comment something that
Mhm.
popped in my mind when Sophia was doing. It's really interesting that all these problems that you're saying, it were there before, but before it was a lot about mobile gaming, because creating games for mobile was the fast and easy thing to
Yeah.
do, that you could do with 2 3 people, and PC was the unattainable hard thing. You need a bigger team, you need a lot of investment, it's a little bit out of hand. It takes years. Like even the indie games that came out in PC console used to take 3 4 5 years to be able to develop. And nowadays, with not only with Unreal becoming easier to use and having more features, and everything, the technology is getting a lot better, but also the advent of AI, how people can create different things and iterate with the games a lot faster than they could do before. Now, the problem that was only in mobile is clearly in PC and console as well. So it's all around the block on that. And that's an interesting thing to see. But go, Charlie, what do you
Oh,
think?
yeah. So I live just next to Dundee, and this is a Chris van de Kyle fact, so you know it's true. Dundee has more game devs per capita than any other city in the world. So 1 in 30 people in Dundee either works in games academia or game industry. And the reason for that, partly because Abertay was the first university in the world to have a games design degree, but also we have something like 63 or 68 independent studios based in the city centre. So we have a plethora of indie studios who are all doing really well. They're not competitive with each other. They collaborate very well with each other. The people like Chris van de Kyle, who Minecraft, all of those things, has been there giving back, mentoring, supporting. Abertay does this as well. So there's a really good indie base here. So in terms of things like funding and exposure, it's a kind of nice community where this is happening in our little city. It's not happening all over the world. You can't do this in America because America is much, much bigger than Scotland. But it's that kind of nurturing environment here. So that's why we have so many indie studios, and that's why a lot of students sometimes don't even finish their degree because they've got a game, it's going well. They go off and they make an amazing game and build a studio based on that. The problem then for indie studios, it's always going to come down to money. So a lot supplement with work for hire on the side, which brings in that regular money, and then they can do their passion projects. So there's ways and means of dealing with funding, and I think again that doesn't negate them from being an independent studio if they're getting funded for work for hire for another project. That's nothing to do with the game development. So that's what I think anyway.
But do you think that outside, because it was something you mentioned, yeah, Scotland is a lot smaller
Mm,
than other
everywhere.
countries, especially like if we think that the US is one of the key markets for games on the top three. And do you think that the indie game developers in those markets, they are already more focused on being acquired or being part of a bigger publisher? Is it shifting the mindset of the indie developers instead of doing passion projects that they can put in the market just because they like doing it and having a more commercial point of view on
No,
doing
I
things?
definitely agree with that. And I think the reason that indie studios are so successful in Dundee is because there's that lack of competition. They're not out to get each other, they're supporting each other and helping each other for the most part. In America, the competition is much, much, much higher. So I think it's much more difficult to build these sort of relationship bonds with other studios. And so you still have that idea where I'm going to be an indie developer is like telling your parents you want to be a ballerina or an astronaut. Like it's like, okay, but what will you do for a real job? um, so that idea of yeah, I could do this and then go and work for a bigger studio, or I can make this game and then sell it, and you're at that point of like, are you selling your soul, are you selling your creativity? If that's your motivation, maybe go and work for a bigger studio to begin with, because not every game is going to turn into $1 million cash cow. And that's why a lot of indie studios are doing passion projects. The first game possibly won't even turn out very well, but it's a building board. It's starting to slowly get your name out there. Building your community is one of the most important things as well. You know, you've got to have a community around you. This is where Discord and the social medias come in. But I think in America the competition so much higher. It's apples and kiwis. You know, it's completely different situations.
I think this is the area where, in some respects, that indie publisher area can become a sweet spot if you find the right partner and they're respectful. I mean, a lot of the people won't take IP rights, and you'll still they'll be more focused on the things that you can't provide. So yes, they'll have an input, but they're not directing your game. They're just sort of saying, oh, well, why don't we do this? We've got the resources to help you do this. Oh, you were only developing for PC. We can help get this onto console as well. Things like
Mhm.
that. I think that can be a sweet spot for indie developers, but the catch is for a lot of indie developers, it's exactly growing off what you said, Charlie, is that like a lot of publishers will want to see that something's live, that you've done something. It's I would say it's not that it doesn't happen, but you've got much greater odds of getting a publisher to pick up your game if this is your second or third game. And even if it doesn't have to have sold millions, in fact, if your first game sold millions, the question might be like, well, why are you looking for a publisher? It's more just to say like, look, you can actually follow this through. If we like partner up with you, this isn't going to go nowhere. Like you've actually shipped a product, you've understood the whole route, so you've shown that you can do it, so now we can help. So I think you for a lot of indie publishers, I think one of the things that can become a bit lost, and this is a little bit hard to say, but is that like, but it's the same with writing, it's the same with any creative medium, I think, is that it's not impossible, but it's rare that your very first thing is going to be your magnus opus. It's, your the greatest thing ever. You have to go with we see quite a few people who come along, and what they are wanting to create is amazing. It sounds phenomenal, but you're thinking that's maybe your fourth game with a publisher and a bigger team. You're not going to make a 80-hour branching narrative RPG, just the two of you, and get it out in 2 years' time. You're just not. So why don't we take that idea and scale it down, make it smaller, get it out there, and then you can take this bigger idea and pitch that, but saying, but look, we did this. This is what we could do where we were. And so I think that's one of the tricks with indie that can, I think, to bring it all the way back, can help make a studio more competitive over the long run and cement themselves as a studio, is get something out there and use that as your building block rather than your idea as the building block. If your goal is to solidify yourself as a studio and in fact, maybe get a partner, whether that be for funding, whether that be for publishing, whatever. And I do mean the right partner. I don't mean any partner. I mean, there's a lot of due diligence to do there, but use your building blocks, get that there, get something out there, and have your bigger idea as the later pitch.
I agree. Yeah, I one thing that always bothers me and Sophia, you tackled that a little bit, is that you won't get investment for your first game. Most investors will say the first game is a failure. Talk to us when you have the second one.
But importantly,
And
it's only a failure from a financial point of view. What they're
yep,
wanting to see is that the success is from a creative, a learning, an education, a development point of view. You as a studio, you grew, you learned a lot. Yeah, it's only the odds are it's only maybe going to be a financial failure, and actually, it's a huge, on the balance of odds. If you can find a way to make your studio sustainable through things like grants and stuff,
yep,
then actually that failure can be a huge success for you. Sorry.
yeah. But that's the point, is that in countries like in UK or in Finland, Finland became a powerhouse on game development because the government gives a lot of funding. If you can, it's a lot of things of, if you can put together 50,000, the government doubles the 50,000, or you can get a little funding to do a prototype. In Finland, this is amazing because even if you don't get funding, if you're unemployed, the government is going to pay you the salary, or if you're a student, you get a salary to be a student. So you have time to do little prototypes and little things for you to test it in the market. The United States doesn't have any of this. Is well, if there is any funding, scream at me in LinkedIn or on the comments of the video, because I have never heard of a like free funding here. Money, go develop something. Don't need to pay me anything. Approach in the US, I haven't heard anything. And when we go and see in the media, it's always extremely scary because all the reports are how extremely saturated the market is, how hard it is for indie developers to survive, and without a publisher surviving, there is a lot of the narrative of how hard the market is, and uh, I firmly think that we are, in a certain way, like, this will sound negative, and I promise I will turn this around and make it positive. I always like to end the podcast on a positive note, but we need to say the ugly truth before we can start saying the ways to go around. But I think the ugly truth is that a lot of the professionals in the industry now, they are hindering the indie development because they are focusing a lot on the big players and how they are making money, and kind of creating this image that being an indie developer is almost impossible. Like that era where people could create a game and do a video on YouTube about it and get millions, it doesn't exist anymore. But I think the narrative is very negative on that turn, and it bothers me. Like, I don't have a solution. I'm just venting here. That bothers me as hell because I think there is a very healthy indie scene. People are developing
Hmm.
games. People are still doing what they love. It's just that the media and the narrative is now looking at them
Mm.
unless they break that barrier, Valheim style, and suddenly they are this, or the vampire game that suddenly became super popular. Then everybody talks about them, but there isn't much of a focus on what are the great creative games that are there unless they broke some barriers in
Hmm.
sales. What I'm trying to say is too much focus in sales in the
Mm.
bigger players. It's a little bit unbalanced, I think.
No, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And pulling back to what Sophia said there, even if your first game, I think you have to go into it thinking your first game is essentially your first pancake, right? Everything was right. It just didn't turn out perfectly in the pan. You stick it to one side because you're going to eat it later. You know you are, but you make the other pancakes. And so, what that actually does for a publisher, maybe it wasn't a financial success, but it shows you've gone from the beginning of the process all the way through and you have finished and you have shipped. And that's a huge learning curve. That's not someone going, oh no, it's too difficult, this didn't work out, let's move on to something new. It shows tenacity, it shows that you're going to stick to the project. And that's worth more than getting money straight away, because a lot of studios who do break with their first game have a very, very hard time following up. And you know yourself from the music business, that one singer, that one group who has that number one hit single on their first try, what's their second single? Can anyone remember? It is that learning curve, and you do have to spend time and pay your dues to for things to work out. If things come too easy, that's part of the problem. But I think there's, in terms of focusing or not focusing on money, people like Humble Bundle do an amazing job to support and share the work of indie developers. Itch.io as well is a really nice space. There's a lot of sort of political style games that are being solo devved as well, and indie devved. And I think if players want to look for this stuff, it's not hard to find. And as we said, Humble Bundle have bundles of these amazing games from all over the world that you donate to a good cause, and you can play all of these games. You can follow, you can wish list. Obviously, game jams are a good way to get started in that process as well. So it's it's for the players also to have a little think, and Sony are gonna be fine if you don't buy the next whatever one they're putting out. An indie developer wishlisting a game from them actually makes a huge difference. So have a look at that side of things. Try something new, I guess.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
fair enough. I was criticized only the big media, not the but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that like the Humble Bundle thing is a great shout. And I think that because one of the things that I think is part of the, when I say the problem, I don't mean there's anything sinister. I just mean it's a problem, is what I talked about right at the top, is discoverability. And that also, I think a little bit from a consumer point of view, is I think to some, indie development is a little bit like what Marvel and DC are to those that have never read it. They look cool, they look interesting, there's some quality in there, but trying to find a way to get into this, where there's like, in the case of comics, there's like lore that goes on forever. And it can become so overwhelming that you're just like, no, it's like walking into a shop where they've got every single game ever made. You're like, I can't do this, I'm out. Versus a shop that's got maybe like 20 games, and you think, oh, this one looks like the one I'll like out of these 20. And I think that's the point. I think to get consumers more and more and more into indie devs, the thing that the industry can do is have a lot more curation. Now, I know that that creates a paradox, because it creates this point where actually the competition becomes even more fierce to be part of that curation. But I see it more as a long game. If you can create, like Humble are doing, like, Sony and Xbox will, and Nintendo will have their indie focused sales. But if you can make sure that those sales are highly curated with a little bit of something for everyone, market them, make sure that a wide range of gamers explore these like set 10 games for the month that are like your indie selection, let people slowly grow into like, oh wow, look at this cool world that's out there for indie games, then they'll be there. It's a bit like, Marvel might, for example, do like, you want to get into Marvel, you've never watched any of them. Okay, here's the 3 films you should watch to get yourself going. No, ignore all the other stuff that people are just watch these 3 and then you'll get. It's that sort of thing which in the short term would actually make the discoverability actually make more of a problem in sense, but I think overall it could help this indie sphere that we're referring to by sort of getting more people, easing them into indie development, because we know loads of people who love indie games because we're in the industry, we talk about it, and people who've played games all their life will know and love indie games, but part of the point is bringing all gamers, because everyone's a gamer, and it's about bringing everyone, because a lot of the time people will just go onto the store and be like, I know Call of Duty, I'm going to play that. Like, what's another shooter that's like Call of Duty? Oh, I'll play Battlefield. Rather than say they're being like, oh, there's this indie shooter package and it's like a third of the price and you get 5 games for the price of 1. Why don't you give this a go, sort of thing, I think that
Uh,
that would really help. And Humble are doing great work with that, as are a number of other people, to be fair.
And
And
that's a
streamers.
wonderful segue. I love you girls because you give me the segues in the silver pellet. So this is an awesome segue. I want to turn this around because I know especially myself, I blame myself. I can be super negative about the industry every now and then. It's an industry I love, but it's also because I love, I can see all the bad sides of it and love the bad sides as well because anyway, that's love. But as Sophia was talking about like different ways of discoverability, I wanted us to start to discuss a bit what can indie developers do to really pop up in the market. We talked a few of things about each.io and Humble Bundle and the work they do, but even on those markets there is a certain saturation as well. So what are your advices, like your golden nuggets on what would you like to see indie developers doing to pop in the market a bit?
I mean,
I
what a
mean,
lot of.
one of
No, go you on.
there's a lot of things I say to developers when I mentor, and I have a whole presentation about this. But I think one of the things that instantly pops to mind, I think that's maybe a bit off the beaten track, not so much the obvious, is look, understand you're not going to be competing with the big players in this market. That's now that doesn't mean you can't be inspired by these games, but you're not going to be competing with The Legend of Zelda. You're not going to be competing with Call of Duty. So taking that as the route, I always say know your niche. It's about
Mhm.
understanding your market. I mean, there's 2 points I'll say, and then I'll, let Charlie say something. But it's like the 2 points are, first, though, the lesser of the 2 is know your niche, know your market. If you think your game is for everyone, you're wrong. Everyone should be able to enjoy it, but you need to know who is your core market, because that's really important when you're an indie developer. Because, for example, I always say that some of the smaller genres can actually yield the biggest results for indie developers from the point of view of, like, if you're making a visual novel or if you're making a retro style, top-down shooter style thing. These markets have niche audiences, but if you can find those audiences on things like Reddit, through social media, through, whatever, Discord, then these are a hardcore audience who are clamoring for these sorts of experiences, and they'll be able to, they'll want to play them again. But even platformers have seen a bit of a resurgence in recent times. But if you know that your game is a platformer and it's mainly focused to fans of platformers before everyone else, focus in on trying to grab that audience rather than a wider audience. Now, much more than that, the golden rule for me, it's the thing I bang on the most about at the Big Indie Pitch when I mentor, when I present, is you have to know what your USP is, what your unique selling point is. You've got to know that, because that's your discoverability. You can make, Mass Effect is one of my favorite series. You can make Pokemon. Let's take Pokemon, my favorite series. You can make Pokemon and you can think it's better than Pokemon. But if all it is like Pokemon, but in your eyes,
Mhm.
better, that's not a unique selling point. You need something that identifies you as different, because frankly, the market's just going to go and buy Pokemon. Now, if anyone can make Pokemon better, then hit me up, because I'm all over the Pokemon, but my little friends. But my point being is, you have to have something that makes your game unique and stand out, because that's why people are going to pay attention to your game. It's not because I made FIFA, but it's better. The AI is smarter. They pass the ball better. The physics are better. People are just going to buy FIFA. Maybe it's now FIFA, but we've done something else. I don't know. Maybe there's two balls on the pitch and that changes the gameplay. I mean, Rocket League was the epitome of taking the sports game and doing something different with it. It's that is kind of what it's. You need to know what your USP is, and you need to have that, because when it comes to discoverability, having that, understanding it, knowing it, and then using that as the key to your marketing is going to be make or break for most, if not all, indie developers, in my opinion.
Charlie, before I go, just to say, one pet peeve that I have is the way people mix uh, influence and copy.
Mm.
Like, so
Yes,
if you're doing a
yes,
game like Pokemon,
there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah, it's great to have influence. Be careful not to be exactly like
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon, because we see both. I have seen both sides. I have
Yeah,
seen
Yeah.
games where you have different influences, and it's great, and they are still innovative. They are just giving you the references for you to understand
Mm-hmm.
what is the feelings that
I
you're
mean,
trying to create. But I have also seen people that say, "Oh, this is like Clash of Clans." Like, no, this is not like Clash of Clans. This
it
is
is.
Clash of Clans.
I mean,
Like,
a
it
really
is Clash of Clans. Yeah.
a really famous example of that is, and it goes all the way back, because you have Tomb Raider, but Tomb Raider was inspired by other things. We have Uncharted was inspired by Tomb Raider, which ironically then the new Tomb Raider series was inspired by Uncharted, that was inspired by the original Tomb Raider, that was inspired, and inspiration is the root of creativity. And this is how we grow. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But, for example, creating Sonic the Hedgehog, and now it's, I don't know, Timmy the raccoon, and it's basically the same thing. And he's now going through the blue rolling sea zone.
No.
You know, whereas you've got other titles that took inspiration from it. A Hat in Time takes inspiration from a range of different platforming games. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger back in the day was taking all that inspiration from the classics like Crash Bandicoot. So yeah, you're definitely right there. But within that, if you're an indie, and this is really indie advice, you've got to know what your unique selling point is, because it's not good enough to just be another platformer. You could be another 10 out of 10 platformer, but the market is probably going to pick the 9 out of 10 from the established studio if you don't have something that's like, hey, but have you seen this that they don't have? We've got this.
True.
No, I fully
What
agree
are
with that.
your devices, Charlie?
So everything you said, absolutely. You have to know your market, you have to know your demographics, you have to know that before you start developing your game, because otherwise, who are you making your game for? And yes, it would be lovely, as you said, for this game, everyone's going to love my game. No, that's not true. There might be a niche group of people who love your game. You need to find them.
Yeah,
I think, and I mentioned this before, building up a community. A lot of studios now are doing this when they've got pre-releases or they're in development or even pre-development. They're building a Discord community. They're having people involved, their community involved in sort of feedback and very minor QA, or what do you think of this design? What do you think of that design? So the community is already building this sense of belonging and almost a feeling of ownership. Then the other, and I mean, I don't think this is possibly quite controversial. It's not a real job, but influencers, people who are influencers as a career, um, reach out to them, and that can be people on Twitch. A lot of indie games have had amazing receptions and grown because of people playing them on Twitch, established Twitch influencers playing your games. These are just people. Reach out. A lot of the time, if you say, "Do you want to play my game for free?" people will play it. They're happy to play these games, and that's another way where you can get your games out there, get them tested within your Discord. You can have closed beta testing. You can have alpha testing. Um, a lot of games are doing sort of pre-release beta tested versions of games where they're players and then giving them feedback. But all of this builds this community, the sense of ownership and a sense of, you know what, I played this really cool game. One that took off like this is a game called Observation Duty. Very basic game. And you just 5 cameras in different rooms of a house, and you basically click through them to see if anything's changed. But the jump scares you get from this game are hilarious. And so it's really good to watch people play it. So it's become quite popular because Twitch streamers are playing it. You can play a game in 20 minutes. So at the end of their stream, they'll put on a game of this. And the audience and the sales have shot through the roof because of this, because of that outreach within the community. So I feel definitely USP. You have to have something different. Otherwise, what's the point? You need to know your marketing. You need to do that before you even begin the development of the game. Then build your community and reach out to Twitch influencers, other kind of influencers who can play your game and get that word out there for you. That would be my 4 points, and 2 of them were already Sophia's anyway, so that's my 2 points.
Yeah. So I have only one to add to those. I agree with everything you girls are saying, but I would add test early. If you have this amazing idea that you think it's great, good for you, do like Sophia would know that because these indie developers were in her big indie pitch. My favorite idea were, and you might remember the name of the developers. I don't remember, but the I saw developers that uh, had a very basic art style and idea for a game, started already posting on TikTok and in social media, getting the feedback of the audience, and then doing gameplay tests with the audience. What do they think? Change it based on the community. It goes connected with what Charlie said about building a community, but if you're building a community when your game is already developed, you're already late.
Mm-hmm.
You should be building the community from the moment you had the idea,
Absolutely.
and lose that ridiculous fear that people will copy you. If people want to copy you, they will copy you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
an idea is nothing. Idea is connected with the execution. You can have the best idea ever. If the execution is flawed, it's not gonna work. I can attest to that. I had in my opinion, the best idea ever. The execution was horrible and nothing came out of it. It's like, yay. Because in the end is that it's about the team, is about execution, is about timing in the market. There is so many little things that count on that test it first, just to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're not putting all your time and money into something that afterwards is going to break your heart, right? When you can actually find other ideas that you can do. um,
Absolutely. And to add to that, get it tested by other people, not you and not your friends. Because you know
yep.
the
Yeah.
game and you can play it very easily. Your friends or your family are going to say, oh my goodness, that's wonderful. You're great. Get external, unbiased testers because they will tell
Yep.
you what's real.
Very true. And then to end, I wanted to end with my favorite thing is, what are your favorite indie games out there? Like where do you have indie games that you really love and you still play, either you're expecting or anything?
I
What
mean,
what do
I,
you
I can
say?
I can start with one of mine, which is going to be a bit. I mean, obviously, I love all of the devs that I see at the Big Indie Pitch. I see some amazing ideas, and I am very, very excited for Transfuser again this year because the last couple of years have had some amazing ideas. So I'm excited to see them, but not to play favorites. So to pull from another source here and just be something that I discovered myself is I'm a big fan of a series on Switch called Dadish. It's a very simple platformer where you're a dad who's a radish and his kids have gone missing and you basically got to go and save him. And it has a bit of like a mobile DNA in the sense of the levels are really short and snappy. The platforming with a little bit of puzzling thrown in there. There's boss battles as well. You can finish the whole game in about 2 hours. There's 3 games, and now there's even Daily Daddish, where the developer he uploads a game every single day. Like what? Not he uploads a level every single day, just a short little level. It's cute, and the reason why I found it at first was I wanted a platformer. Again, this is knowing your market. I wanted a platformer, and I like cute, and it was cute. It had this little dad who's a radish, and he one of the bosses in the first game is this hamburger who then later becomes your helper and your friend, and then there's aliens involved, and it's just wacky and bonkers. And as much as the story is like when you finish a zone, you get like a little bit of a story where he rescues one of the children, and it's just really tight gameplay that's short fun. It's one of those that you play for about 10 minutes and you think, oh, I've really enjoyed that. And then you'll come back to it the next day. And then I finished the first 2 games and I was like, oh, I hope there's a third game. And then when the third game was released, and here's the thing, I bought the first game in a sale, really cheap sale. I bought the second game in a lesser sale. Third game, I had it pre-ordered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I was like, I want that.
Proves the
I love it.
point, yeah.
So I could name lots, but you put us on the spot, and I think Daddish is a great shout for anyone who loves platformers. It's on Switch. Even if you buy it at full price, it's not expensive. Highly recommend it. It's on other platforms as well, but I played it on Switch because I think the form factor is perfect for it. If you've ever played a game called Bean Dreams on mobile, where the bean is always bouncing, now
I
Daddish isn't
haven't.
always bouncing, but it's a little bit similar to Bean Dreams, which is another great game, but that one's on mobile.
Nice. What about you,
I
Charlie?
It's such an unfair
Did I
question.
put you on spot?
Yeah, a lot of my friends work in indie studios, so I can't. I love them all. Um,
Yeah.
I there, yeah, there's so many different and different varieties, and I think it depends on my mood as well. Like what I'm not into kind of these long term, never ending go and tidy your island, and that just bores me. But there's so anything by Quantum Astrophysicists Guild, which is an amazing independent studio. Freshly Frosted is a fantastic game, sort of physics based game. Rain on Your Parade, where you play
Yeah.
a cloud that your whole function is to just ruin everyone's day. Also made by a good
Form a big
friend.
indie picture, that one.
Yeah, Jakob is a fantastic guy, and that game is literally him.
Yeah.
I think there's. I love the aesthetics of Cuphead, of Limbo, of Hollow Knight. I cannot play Cuphead because I rage quit so hard every time, but I love looking at it. I love watching other people play it. Um, there's too many, and if I've forgotten to mention all the other everyone on my LinkedIn who's an independent studio, their games are the best. There we go.
That's the politically correct way to do it.
There you go. Just
My
Absolutely.
just to shout out, it's by Thomas K. Young, Daddish. There you go. You can see them there.
nice.
That is.
So highly recommend
Oh,
Daddish. It's 1, 2, and then 3's on the other line because you know the way it does it. But yeah, highly recommend that.
Oh, on
nice.
observation duty
My,
as well.
my favorite indie game of all times. Although there are a lot of other games I played. I would do the same politically correct, Charlie. Indie developers on my feed. I love you all now, but Machinarium is my absolute favorite, and I don't even know if by today's standards if it still would be an indie developer. It's like Limbo, the same way it got so much name out there that it
Mhm.
kind of breaks being an indie anymore. But at the time it was released, Machinarium was this piece of art where people where everything was drawn by hand, and all the music puzzles, all the things is so creative, it's so beautiful, and I love it. And I think games like that, besides, like, I think games, the beauty of games is that it can be from the simplest things to pieces of art, and it doesn't
Mhm.
matter what it is, they are awesome in their own rights. But I think uh, games like Machinarium, like Terraria, like Limbo, that are they're artistic and well produced and well thought, uh, is what gives me the motivation to see, like, oh, there are gonna be gems out there. Like, look in
Hmm.
the indie games, because being indie doesn't mean that it's gonna be crappy or simple. Sometimes it means it just doesn't wasn't discovered yet.
And you're
Yeah.
also more likely to find maybe something that has a more interesting, darker sense of humor, or a more interesting twist, or something that, a big established studio can't make Sonic the Hedgehog suddenly a goth who, hates eggs or something. But an indie studio can make the same kind of characters. Sony couldn't potentially wouldn't be able to make Dadish because it sounds like a really kind of quirky, fun game. Where an indie studio can do that. This is where you can get your weird on. Go and look at indie games. That's where the weird is, and that's where the cool is.
And we like weird.
And we
We
love
are
weird.
we do like
The
weird.
weirder the better.
Yeah. And on this high note, I want to say thank you, girls, for another amazing podcast. And we're gonna be back next week. Well, next week is gonna be interesting. I hope we're gonna be back next week. There is a chance that Charlie and I are not in state of being back. We're gonna be in Istanbul, in White Nights Istanbul, and the whole hotel, internet, and time to fingers crossed we're able to make it happen next week. But we're gonna be back, even if something happens. We're gonna be back, and it's gonna be fun. You guys are gonna see we travel so much that sometimes I'm gonna be with Sophia in Japan, and then sometimes we're all gonna be in Korea at some point. It's a geography place, so it's gonna be fun. But girls, thank you very much. Have a lovely time, and thank you everybody that listened and watched. And I see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye.